You don't have a lot of time when you're just one person if something goes wrong. So simplifying whatever it is that you can do to do some favors for your future self.
Welcome back to another episode of Live Chat with Jen Weaver, the podcast where we deliver actionable support ops processes with the people who do it best. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by a powerhouse in the world of customer experience, Brittany Ferguson. Brittany is the kind of leader who doesn't just talk about customer support, she builds it from scratch. I met her years ago and have looked up to her ever since. With over a decade of experience across startups, SaaS, fintech, health tech, and e-commerce, she has led teams through hypergrowth, slashed response times by 3x, and maintained sky-high customer happiness scores. And today she's here to share with us exactly how she does it. So if you're at a startup or a small company and you're on the customer team, or you are the customer team, this is the episode for you. This podcast is sponsored by SupportMan, which connects Intercom to Slack and uses AI to give agents feedback and surface problems in real time. Let's jump right in.
In a lot of my experience, I have walked straight into the door as the first and only person managing a support team, where it's like, we have nothing, we need help, come in, take ownership, pick something up and start something from scratch. Today, I'm going to talk about what it's like to walk in that door of, the room that you've just gotten keys to the kingdom for. And how you kind of approach, like, where do you start building out that process in order to create that function to run a support team and be able to talk to the customers?
Yeah. So going from basically 0 to 60, it's my first day. I'm on this new team. What's my first action? What's my first step?
So the very first step is one, you've just walked in to this new company. You've got to kind of start from someplace. So understanding, what the product is, what is the customer journey like? What is in place from beginning of end of that product? It's meeting with the right people, whether it's like product or engineering, to just kind of go through and figure out how is the product kind of set up, being incredibly curious to kind of start writing out some of that documentation if it doesn't exist, or taking what kind of documentation that is there and then making sure that all of the different inputs. Because a lot of times if there's no support side to it, you don't know where some things can kind of fall off the rails. So you're going to have to sit there and kind of think of like worst case scenario, because all customer journeys should be best case scenario. But if there's a worst case scenario, what do you kind of need to be aware of so that you would know where people will be interacting with support throughout that process?
So what are some tools that you would use to build that map?
So I've used Google Drive. Figma's one that we've used before, but you can basically just kind of start from any place. When you start in this type of role, you kind of need to move quickly. So don't start a tool that's like a bigger distraction than it should be for what you need to accomplish.
So you're doing this customer journey map and you're working with engineering and product to understand a tool that maybe doesn't even exist yet. So you need to build deep product knowledge sort of what's going to be. And that probably involves really good relationships with those teams, right?
Incredibly. Yes. It is just having regular check-ins, really positive, rapport with whoever it is on that team, to just constantly have new information shared with you, just going to every single product and marketing meeting, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not relying necessarily on them to think, oh, my customer person needs to know about this slight change or this development, but being there and being the eyes on the ground.
And it is your role to make sure that support doesn't take a backseat to anything, to find things out after the fact.
Okay. Now, if you had experiences where you're in a meeting or you're working with this and you're getting this information, but you have a moment where you're like, oh, well, actually, this might be a road bump. This might be a bump in the road. This might be a problem for a customer.
When I've been in this position, we have typically had a couple of beta users. So we had some feedback loops in place already. People who we're trusted to know like, hey, this isn't going to be the smoothest and most pristine process. There are going to be some friction points. And so we're going to rely on a relationship with you to let us know where you are seeing some issues. I think that's going to be one of the biggest indicators, because if you already know how the product is, every person who works typically within a company, you kind of become too close to product and services that you offer. And it can be hard to find out about those outlier situations. So you're kind of working in between the internal teams and the external teams, even as like you're kind of building the ship, before it's actually ready for the official launch.
And hopefully those beta users are really game for providing feedback and working with you on maybe glitches that come up.
Correct. Yeah. And then just also having those systems in place for someone to be able to provide you that feedback regularly, and then doing those regular check-ins with them to, if somebody's sitting there and they kind of forget, oh, I should let them know that this isn't working. I mean, how many times have you used some software that you're used to using day in and day out, and you never reach out to support about it? So having that extra level of security of being really proactive, especially in the earlier days, is going to be key to helping get a product set up and ready for launch.
And doing that with just regular meetings with that customer?
Yes, I try to kind of set like at least a little bit of a cadence, or you could also set out like email reminders and things. I'm a firm believer of always providing somewhat of an incentive, whether it is like discount or as easy as like a $15 Visa gift card.
Yeah, so just making sure that you're motivating customers to talk to you. It's almost like a real amplified effect when you have a few beta customers and their feedback has a much bigger effect on the product in those early days than, when you have millions of customers or thousands of customers. And so that's sort of step one. You're gathering, it's like the sponge phase, right? Like you're gathering information from your product team, your engineering team, your leadership, your customers, and you're building out that customer journey map, but also influencing it. So then what's next?
So then you're going to go through the process of setting something up that's ready for scale. So setting up your department so that you're ready to kind of start interacting with a lot of those customers. And part of that is you're going to want to set up a really solid support ticketing system. So whether you're using Help Scout, Intercom, Zendesk, whatever have you, that's going to be incredibly key, because those emails are going to need to be tracked, and you're going to want to start even from day one to make sure that you are checking those metrics, seeing what the current trends are, because when you're the one and only person, if you do start scaling a little bit quickly, it's going to be really challenging to do this all retroactively. So making sure that you are good at setting up all the things that you need to from day one will save you a lot of time.
So setting it up right means using a ticketing system and not just Gmail. Right. But I know it can be overwhelming to kind of over-engineer your help center with tags and workflows, and especially now with AI. Do you have tips on how to do the MVP? What of this ticketing system do I need to set up as a single person customer team for now, but to prepare myself for the future?
Sure. So I'm a firm believer in just making sure that everything that you are setting up as far as how you're importing your emails, you always have a backup. It's so hard to parse out, and just, you don't have a lot of time when you're just one person if something goes wrong. So simplifying whatever it is that you can do to do yourself some favors for your future self. So I think that whenever you are starting the emails, you can maybe kind of predict some of the safe replies, but that's going to be kind of dicey. So you're going to just know that right up front, you're going to need to create things as they kind of come.
Do you think AI, like AI workflows, AI answers, do you think those are useful at this stage, or are they more not so much?
I think they can be for first drafts. I'm a much better editor than I am writing straight from scratch. So I do lean on some AI tools to just take concepts in my head. Here's 4 bullet points, create a draft based off of this. Then I can at least have something to kind of move forward from. It gives me something to like a springboard to work off of. Use humans where you can to do the human elements of the job, and then use AI tools where it makes sense to use those, chatbots, whatever.
And that goes back to your step 2, which is, building a scalable team, which starts with your help desk. I think you were saying it's 2 parts, basically your help desk and your knowledge center for your external help docs.
Yeah. Providing that self-service, it's like adding another person that has no work-life balance to the team. So as one person, I have been the one who's like run the candle at both ends too many times, and we are only human. We do need some sleep. So having something be self-service for somebody to just hop on, get the answers to their questions that, that don't need to be escalated or don't really kind of need to fit the bounds of some kind of nuance situation, that's going to be a big game changer for the customers.
Well, do you have a read on, after that point, how you know when you need to bring on a hire, whether that's an operations person or a specialist?
Yeah. So I don't know about most other people, but like you kind of get that gut check of like, okay, things are starting to kind of uptick your response times. It may be harder to get to enough customers. And I've used a capacity model that helps me kind of gauge based off of all the different channels that people are reaching out to us whenever we hit this kind of critical number. And we are at this critical time with how long it takes for us to respond to someone. Now is the time that we need to kind of start looking into adding to the team. One of the other things is introducing like those feedback loops for your product. How is information getting sent back to the rest of your company? So is there an issue that needs to be addressed first and foremost? And once you've solved kind of the holes of where people are kind of coming in to support, if it's something that can be fixed based off of your product services, or if there's better documentation, plugging those holes first will help you determine, do we actually need to hire?
Right. If you have hundreds of conversations come in about this widget's not working, and you just hire somebody, then the widget gets fixed, then your ticket volume goes down, then that was a mistake. You kind of want to keep an eye on,
right,
especially in the sort of high turnover product period at a startup where things are changing really rapidly. That's an interesting point.
Like you wouldn't hire for an incident that holds you out for several days. Yeah. You just know that if you can be as proactive as possible, well, put things in place, like I can't stress how important this is. Communicate. Tell your customers what happens if there's some kind of outage, something that's going on where they are used to getting a really quick response time from you, or you brag about your really short response times because you don't have a huge volume. But whenever you have something that comes up, either let people know first and foremost what is going on, what you plan to do to address it, and when they should expect to hear a follow-up of whenever that's going to be resolved, or whatever the steps are that come next. That's huge.
And it makes me think of it makes me think of too, how do you plan for taking time off or even being sick when you're the one customer person on a team?
So I've always kind of had in the back of my head from the very first time that I worked in a role where I was the one and only person, I was like, if I get hit by a bus, what happens?
Same.
Yeah. And it's not that like I things shouldn't be able to progress, but I always kind of approach things like that, where it's like there always needs to be someone else who knows the basics of how to go. So creating internal documentation for your standard operating procedures, have that book. You will be so glad you had it for if you are sick and somebody else needs to step in. I've had CEOs from a company step in and do support, and they had basically a manual that told them, it was like, it could help them figure out what they needed to do. The other really important piece about having that in place is whenever you need to make that first hire, you're going to be onboarding someone, and you will also be doing support too. So you're going to be wearing multiple hats, 2 jobs at once, and it's going to make life so much easier. And then that way, whenever they're just kind of ready to get run, that there's the exact steps and procedures of how you would handle something, and they can just pick things up and do it the exact same way. So
that's great.
If you need to take a vacation, and then if you need a hire, all those bases are covered.
So I can be hiring my replacement for certain things, and also in case I'm out for some reason. So then after scaling, you mentioned feedback loops.
Right. So this is so important. You definitely want to prioritize any of your feedback loops. Whenever as I mentioned, if you've got beta users, they're fantastic. They're so great at being able to kind of test things out, see where there's holes that need to be plugged, but you're just not going to want to sit there and wait for someone to fill out, an NPS or a CSAT email.
You know what? It feels like a little bit of this is the responsibility of the product team to do customer interviews and to find out what's in the heads of the customers. And some of it is the responsibility of this customer person on the team. But also, like what you're saying is you really have to interrogate people or offer them money to get
Sometimes,
them. Yeah, to get them, especially at the stage where it's so crucial that you get this sort of voice of the customer motion going.
And sometimes, I've been in places where you've had to tag team with product, or I've been in places where product doesn't exist. It's just more of like you've just got engineers and you've got someone who just kind of is more of the product or project manager, but they might need some support or they might need somebody else to kind of create a lot of those conversations. So I've had to do a lot of customer discovery calls. A lot of times support is really good at just kind of distilling those feedback loops anyway, back to the different internal teams that need to be able to take some action items on some of those things. So I think it's just creating either a regular cadence or, a lot of us have those superstar customers where, you can always kind of rely on them to respond. I'm sure you can think of different people from every place that you've ever worked where you're like, oh yeah, that one customer, and you know them by name and a little bit more about them. And you just know that you can kind of rely on them to be like the person to give it to you straight. And it's fantastic. And they are such a gold mine of information. So developing a lot of those really positive customer relationships early on that's so crucial to establish some of those things. So
the relationship is almost, sorry to interrupt you, but the relationship for some of those really engaged customers is almost the best reward, better than a $20 gift card or whatever. They really value, I have a direct line to the customer team at such and such company.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of those people where it's like you have given them so many freebies or coupons or whatever. And it's like at that point, they kind of, I've had someone say like, you don't have to offer this to me every time. Yeah, I would just say like that you're not going to be able to reach everybody, but as much as you can get some of that feedback and information that becomes something that's actionable, hugely helpful.
Yeah. And that really is doing the job of a product manager in a lot of ways. And that's what this role is about, is doing many different jobs. And I think it's perfect for, this may be an aside, but I think it's perfect for the kind of jack of all trades personality where I'm interested in so many things and I learn things quickly. I don't really want to become like an expert in one thing and do that for my whole life. I want to be interested in all these things and then get it to a certain level of maturity and then hire somebody to do the rest of it.
Absolutely. Whenever you're in a startup, every person's job is so critical and everybody is so incredibly busy. Being the person who's at the front lines and support, you can quickly have a workflow set up where after so many days, you ask them about their customer experience or you invite them to something. So you can just set things up proactively. Save yourself some time by putting these things in place when you will need them in the future. If you've got a saved reply that's like, hey, I'm glad that we were able to remedy this for you. Like, would you be willing to chat with us a little bit about your experience further and, go from there? So there's so many different touch points that support has more than most other teams to have that engagement. And if you're already in the middle of talking with someone, if you can just ask them, that one more question, and that will help facilitate some of that conversation while you have them.
Yeah, you're right here chatting with me, and I've just resolved this problem for you. Why don't you go ahead and just tell me what you think about this widget or whatever? Right. Yeah, it's really hard for them to say no to that. So, and it's as you're building out this voice of the customer, you have in mind how you're going to scale your team. For example, asking the support team members, like we just talked about, to, ask some leading questions maybe about product issues, engaging support team members as part of that voice of the customer program. But so then, that's we're 3 steps in. Tell me what's next.
So the next thing is, and I've kind of had this as a theme throughout, if you haven't noticed, is like automate any kind of repetitive things that can come up. Keep saying, save your future self. Be so proud of yourself in the future where you go, past Brittany was amazing to think of this kind of thing. Love her for that. Be the anticipatory support for yourself and the needs that you will have in the future. Are there saved replies, canned responses, something that you know that you're going to say all the time? How many times at the end of a message have you said, like, is there anything else I can help you with? If you don't have that saved, like as a canned response or saved reply, I love using Text Expander for some of the things that I just commonly put out and say, and I can just 2 clicks kind of throw something out there. One of the things is the first thing that I set up, any place that I work at, especially if I'm using Google Chrome, you can create Google Chrome shortcuts. So if I need to go to certain web pages all the time, some kind of backend system that I'm going to need to look up a customer ID or their name or something like that. I love having just these Chrome shortcuts where I can just go into an address bar and type in like maybe 2 letters using Text Expander. Then you can paste in their name or their customer ID number, and then it should pop up to the URL that you have designated and fill in that query search space, the person's information so that you can quickly look them up. It will save you so much extra time.
Well, I just did a whole podcast episode on automating, but I just am thinking like,
sure,
from the wisdom of experience, like snippets with Text Expander and URL expansion, but like what things are so useful that maybe you didn't know beforehand to automate? And I'm stuck on this because I just did this podcast with Rob Dwyer and he automates all the things. And now I'm thinking like, I'm not very technical, right? Like, how do I automate?
It could go as simple as just creating regular cadence of calendar events. Take it a little past the tech side, like the major tech side. I use a lot of those calendar reminders if I know that I need to send reports at a very specific time and just need to kind of keep an eye on things. When you are so busy and you are so in the weeds, it's kind of hard to look up, take a breath, and then say, okay, now what do I need to be doing, right? Like in this moment, that is the most important thing. So just keeping something simple as far as automation.
I love that. Yeah, calendar events as reminders. I think you're right. I think a lot of times the basics tend to have the most payoff. So, automating, what's after that?
So a lot of times, we've heard this so many times before, people think about customer support as a cost center, and CX, it's a revenue generator. It's hard work to create customer loyalty and save people from churn, from not purchasing your product before, canceling their subscriptions, whatever it is. So being able to put the data and those numbers to show how those customer interactions go back towards that's helping to increase their lifetime value with your products and services. So you want to try and track a lot of, if someone's had to engage with you, how likely have they been to purchase after they had their very first issue? And that could be tracked in a couple different ways. I think it kind of depends on what the tools are that you're using, but keeping a pulse on, what are those names that kind of keep showing up and interacting with the team? Is there a way where they are responding to a CSAT score or a customer effort score? And if they're happy and they keep using your services, that's fantastic. And you can document that. Being able to really show that positive customer satisfaction will drive a lot of growth. And then having the number to prove it is really going to be the best point that you can make.
And so, a big part of the job of being the only customer person is proving the revenue value of the CX team. But then what's next?
Sure. So after you've created some of this beautiful documentation that you're incredibly proud of, and you think that great, I check that off the list, all these other things that I kind of have in place that I think that I'm set up for success, so easy to not go back and update a lot of things that you need, especially for yourself. So that internal documentation, a lot of times,
Right.
can fall by the wayside. And then you realize whenever you go, we seriously need some help right now. And you've worked on the capacity model, everything, and you're like, all right, we're bringing in this person. And then you sit there getting ready to go through everything with them, and you go, yeah, this stuff isn't relevant anymore. And you have to just take a red line to it. Do yourself a favor. If the process changes, update it again. Make your future self really proud of your past self. Or maybe it is like creating a Slack bot that says, like, does your documentation need to be updated? Setting yourself reminders, externally talk about automating a couple things. I know that is a good to check in with yourself. Does this need to be updated? You can click no on Slack if you want to set up like a remind me in 30 days. Does anything here need to be changed? That could be like a pretty good idea. But being really flexible with how you did things in the past, maybe like, within your first 30 days, something made sense at the time, and then you don't need it anymore. So you can keep some archives of things. I like to keep a historical folder of how things had been done in the past, but never let those historical documents or anything that you've done in the past create a complete cluttered mess for you later on. So it's just making sure that you are keeping on top of everything that constantly needs to be updated in some way, or that needs to reflect what the current state of everything is. Just thinking through about how to prioritize your workflows a little bit better so that you can say, okay, I'm going to commit X amount of hours of the next couple of days, whether it's broken up into, an hour per day or something, where you just kind of slowly chip away at whatever it is that you need to do. Or if that is the thing that needs to take priority, then maybe that's the first thing that you kind of go ahead and take care of, because it really needs to get done if it's such a critical thing. So I would say, like, you just have to kind of know where that falls into that quadrant of importance and urgency, and where you need to spend your efforts.
And somebody who's never done.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and you can also ask, a lot of times other teams are really willing to help out support. I've had many, many different teams kind of say, like, hey, I know that you're incredibly bogged down because we had an outage or something. Let me know how I can support you. Feel okay with delegating some people, like, we're the last people to kind of typically ask for help for things, because we're the first people who kind of go in, like, as the firefighters. So rely on the rest of your teams within your company if you can, and just that's going to save a lot of anguish.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but in startups where I've worked, people on the team were doing the support work, whether that was an executive or an engineer who were answering support emails. So they could go back to doing that periodically, have space.
Absolutely. I've had that happen before, where the CEO was like, all right, everything's really changed, but like, what do I need to do here? And being able to provide, a manual and say, all right, start from this, or I'm going to start assigning you these kinds of tickets. And it is about that trust in those people. But if you set up like a pretty decent system and you've got, your canned responses or something, then it's kind of hard, to truly fail in that way. You don't have to say that. Okay. It makes a world of difference for someone to be able to kind of step in and you'll know, like, how well your systems work that you've put in place.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's precisely the kind of thing, actually, that somebody who's never been the only customer person on a team just may not even think is appropriate, but is very standard at a startup for people to pitch in. That makes total sense. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah. And so I know we're on to your final step now. And obviously a lot of this is circular. You're continuing to do all of this repeatedly. And so, but also continuing to make those processes better as you move forward.
Right. And being the one and only person can feel really isolating, as many of us know who have been in this position before. You can also just feel like you may be able to have a couple of folks within your team, within the rest of your company, that you can talk to about other, let's see how do I say this?
Rewind.
Yes, rewind. Isolating. So until you're ready to kind of scale your team and add in other folks who you can really understand, support, and talk to you about it, it's very important to make those network connections of other people who do what you do. So
Oh my gosh,
leaning
that's
on,
so true. Yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
when you need that sounding board, you can talk to people on marketing about it, but it's going to
Yeah,
be
it's
a
not the
completely
same.
different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, like what
Yeah.
you said about Text Expander earlier, like when I came on to the team I'm on now and I was the only customer person and I was like, I have to have Text Expander right away. And they were like, what's that? Why is that such a big deal? And I felt kind of insecure. I was a little bit like, maybe am I a weirdo? Like, is it weird that everything I type, I need a semicolon before it to like type out the snippet? But I kind of confirmed with my support community. And it's like that times a million, right?
Right. Like,
Yeah.
but you won't be able to know other people who have like their fantastic tips and tricks who can do these kinds of things. I mean, your whole podcast is celebrating and helping tighten those connections of networking other people to share their knowledge. So this is an incredible resource for people to kind of go in and listen to it and be able to apply what they have learned from other people. And I think the greatest thing is like you can see, especially if you're in a very fast growing company, scaling really fast, you won't really know kind of what it's like on the other side unless you talk to somebody else who's also been there. And there's just a wealth of knowledge and making those connections with people who have been where you've been. And also sharing that knowledge too. So if there's something that you've gained insights to that you can share, like we're just going to create this wonderful, like synchronous, harmonious kind of conversation about how we can continue to grow and just have that continuous learning. Part of joining Support Driven is how you and I know each other.
Yeah,
And
great
some
community.
of the Yeah, fantastic. And it's been so helpful for me over these years. This has been the community that has grown along with me, and I've been able to celebrate other people and their growth. We will never be alone since we have each other. And there's so many different types of communities that can be a little bit more specific of what it is that you're trying to support. I know that there's a couple different ones like Slack communities here. And if you can improve and think about things from another lens and apply it to what you do, everything that I've done for my entire career has been soundboarded off of everybody else. I've gained such valuable insights from my community, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it.
And every step that I've done that, I've reached out and I've said, will you help me with this thing? I've found people willing to just hop on a call and completely just from the goodness of their heart, walk me through things. And that's the inspiration for this podcast, right? Is somebody sitting down with you and just saying, look, I've been there. This is what works for me.
Right. And you never know what comes out of the organic conversations that is just so eye-opening. Because if everything's just like done by a script, done by a curriculum or a syllabus or something, you don't have that flexibility to kind of be able to have those fantastic candid moments that are just like, oh my gosh, that's how you think about something. Or there's so much to be able to glean from all of that.
I love that. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to talk with us about it. I think your experience will be so valuable. Just thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on here. What a joy it's been, and kind of talking about a lot of these things, and for me to be able to finally share my story about starting off as a solo person in support and what that's like, and how to kind of set somebody up for success who may walk in the door and also be given the keys to a blank slate.
Wow, Brittany has done a lot and has huge insight for folks who are the only customer person or who are just building out the customer function. So grateful for her showing up and sharing her expertise. If you're stepping into a new support role, here's a quick recap of the process we just went over. 1, absorb everything. This is the sponge phase with product, customers, and team knowledge. 2, prepare to scale. Set up your ticketing system and knowledge base. 3, create feedback loops, essentially building customer relationships. 4, automate what's repetitive. 5, prove the revenue value from the very beginning, how support drives retention and growth. 6, keep your documentation, including your internal documentation, updated. 7, build your network. Connect with other CX pros for support and insights. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your team. And if you like this podcast's focus on tactical processes and you use Intercom, check out Support Man for instant AI quality review in Slack. See you next time.